This video is for students to review the two poem selections, Sympathy and America from Common Lit. We're going to start with the poem Sympathy by Paul Laurence Dunbar. As students can see in the introduction, this particular poem, Dunbar uses the experiences of a cage bird to comment on the oppression of African Americans following the Civil War. We're going to first start with the TP-Cast poetry analysis for the poem, and then we're going to get into the multiple choice questions. So to start, the title of the poem is Sympathy. Before reading, students should consider what does the word sympathy mean and how do they think it's going to apply to the poem. The second thing students should do is paraphrase. After reading the poem, pick a line and translate it into your own words on a literal level. For example, line 1 refers to a caged bird. As we can tell from the introduction, the caged bird is not the literal interpretation Paul Laurence Dunbar wants audiences to have. He wants the audience to consider instead the oppression of African Americans following the Civil War. The third step of the TP-Cast template is connotation, examining the poem for meaning beyond the literal. For example, in lines 8 and 9 of the poem, I know why the caged bird beats his wing till its blood is red on its cruel bars. The connotation there is that this bird is struggling. This bird has had hardship, and this hardship and this struggle is clearly evident based on other aspects that the viewers can now see thanks to the imagery Dunbar uses. The next step is the attitude of the poem. After reading Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem Sympathy, the reader should be able to match an attitude of hope and longing that is being expressed here. Dunbar expresses many vivid experiences of this caged bird to help readers understand what was occurring at the time. The next step in the poem is to analyze the shift. Are there any changes that the speaker can note, that the speaker has, that the readers can note? Students should look at lines 19 and 20, but a prayer, but a plea. Those conjunction words and conjunction phrases being used in those lines of the poem clearly express a shift in the speaker's attitude, or at least a shift in the thoughts that the reader should be understanding the speaker is trying to convey. Looking at the title again, this time the student should interpret, what is sympathy? What sympathetic feelings is Dunbar trying to convey to readers based on the content of this poem? And lastly, theme. What is the theme of the poem? Students should consider what is the subject and what is the poem saying about the scene. Again, students should look at the introduction and read and try to analyze and interpret the experiences of a caged bird and Dunbar's comment on the oppression of African Americans following the Civil War in America. Looking at the assessment questions, students should see question 1, part A is asking the students to identify a central theme. Based on what we've already talked about, which of these answers best fits? Question number 2. Which section from the text best supports the answer to part A? Based on the answer to part A, what theme the students chose in their own words best lined up with one of the multiple choice answers, which quote helps convey that same idea? Question 3 is asking the students what is the meaning of the word feign in line 4. Students can either use context clues or search a dictionary for the answer. Question 4, which detail from the text best supports the answer to part A? Again, after having the clear definition of the word feign from line 11, what additional line helps us understand what that word means? And then the last question is 5, how does stanza 1 contribute to the development of the poem's theme? Students should consider what ideas in stanza 1 are repeated. Think about things that the bird sees. Think about things that the bird does throughout the course of the poem. And how is it developed? What does that development mean? The next poem for students to look at is going to be America by Claude McKay. Again, we have an introduction here. Claude McKay, Jamaican-American novelist, played an important role in the Harlem Renaissance. The following poem discusses his or her feelings about America. So again, we start with the TPCAST template, the title, consider and make a prediction. What is the poem going to be about? Again, look at the introduction, America, and Claude McKay's feelings on America. Paraphrasing a line of the poem, students can look at line 1. Although she feeds me bread of bitterness, the she is referring to America, and the bread of bitterness can be considered a sense of false hope that is given to immigrants who come into America. C, for the connotation, look at line 3, stealing my breath of life. Again, the idea here is that immigrants who come into America have a sense of false hope, and once they get here, the treatment of those immigrants and against the American ideals that they are given or what they understand prior to coming to America and how those differ. The attitude in the poem, what is the speaker's attitude? Looking at the latter part of the poem, lines 9 and 10, I stand within her walls, not a shed of terror, malice, not a word of jeer. The poet, the speaker of the poem, seems to be conveying a sense of strength, a sense of dignity, that despite all of the discrepancies between what they thought about America and the realities of their situation, they're firm in how they feel and they are hopeful in what could one day become of their future. The next part of the TPCAST template is the shift, any changes in the speaker's attitude. Students should look again for conjunction or transitional phrases, such as the one in line 8. Yet as a rebel fronts a king in state. There's a difference, there's a shift in what the speaker is saying and the message they're conveying to the reader. Theme for this particular poem, again, we're looking at strength and we're looking at the ideas of what America was thought to be for this immigrant and the realities of their situation. And then last, students should again examine the title, interpretive level, what is America, what is the meaning behind this particular poem. So now going into the multiple choice assessment questions. Question 1, which of the following best describes the speaker's feelings about America? Again, this is a main idea question. What is the main idea the author is trying to convey? Question 2, which of the following best supports that answer? Based on the main idea that the students feel they can summarize in their own words, which lines of poetry best match that interpretation or lead to that interpretation? Question 3, the word darkly is most likely used to convey which of the following? Again, context clues, students should examine the lines before and after line 11. What is darkly? What is the author's intention behind using that particular word choice? And then question 4, looking at again that phrase darkly and looking at the answer to part A, which one of these quotes also lines up with the intentional use of that particular word? And then last, question 5, consider the imagery used describing she or her, and how do those images contribute to the overall meaning of the poem? Again, as we already talked about earlier in this video, line 1, although she feeds me bread of bitterness, the she or her is referring to a personified version of America. So what is this overall meaning? What is the overall effect of personifying America in the way that Claude McKay does? So now that students have had an overview of both the poems using the TPCAST template and going over the multiple choice questions, please make sure you submit all of your answers and that you check over your responses before turning them in.